keep it alive through these lines I write. I keep it live cause I thrive. I might just blow your mind tonight. I'm so hyped, but it's no hype. From this height, it's direct hits on sight. I'm your type, lend me your ears to show you that there's something in me. I'm not giving up, I'm standing right here, holding these days hostage. And I'll make this my year. We turning fear into love, and the love's in the air. I love doing this cause nothing compares. Nothing can share that same type of feeling when you feeling them flares. They can't catch it, it's havoc. I rip to a tear, switch a scenario. My stereos, I leave them impaired. Variables start to change and they're all in my range. I just gotta grab it, it's all mathematics. Every step is drastic, I make it fantastic. I'm trying to take your breath away. Asthmatic.
This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo.
Yeah, just nod your head with it, so explicit and vivid. Every image is intricate, intimate. I put my all into it, no scrimmage and no rules. I'm a pro tool, hear my heartbeat, beat into the vocals. I'm so loco, lost my mind, oh no. It's ponderoso, dope, so no overdose, cause it's dope, yo. Man, this is house grown, mixed with some milestones. So I let the style flow down like the Dow Jones, bringing it with some foul tones, letting the crowd know we getting loud, so it's eardrum rudiments. Yeah, we bring it rude again. Move, little hooligan. Music for tuning in, full time to the 10. I'm on my clock like I told you. I'm doing this for dreams we pursuing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anti-Media Radio Show. Once again with your host, Nick Bernabe, here on UCY.TV. Thank you all for tuning in, and we're really happy to be back with you tonight on this Wednesday in the United States. All these crazy things going on tonight, and we're going to break down as much as we can in this 1 hour that we're allotted here, and we're hoping to expand the show to another hour in the near future as we continue to grow here and include different aspects of media as we, push forward with music and, activists and more special guests. And of course, we're always going to have our longtime visitors on the show that we typically bring with you, including our longtime co-host DB Schwartz. What's up, DB?
Not much, Nick. Just I guess waiting for the dust to settle after the crocodile tears. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And we're going to talk about that tonight. And all kinds of other things. Jake isn't on with us yet tonight. I'm not sure if he's going to be joining us. I know he's going to be doing a little driving, and as I'm sure plenty of people are aware, we've been getting some crazy weather out here in Southern California. I mean, there was even like a tornado watch, which is very, very rare. But estimates are saying that we're getting like one of the strongest storms here in 5 to 10 years. So, there's a lot of flooding, and luckily not too many people dying on the roads yet. But, it's something that we're not too used to here in the middle of this drought, to get this kind of rain. But, besides that, we got plenty of things to go over tonight. And we're going to have a great panel going. We're also joined tonight by Claire Bernish. What's up, Claire?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Really well, personally. I mean, of course, the news isn't so great as usual, but I guess it's a good thing that we're up here on the radio talking about it, so people know what the hell's going on, and hopefully it does something. Hopefully it has an effect out there. So far, so bad for the prospects in 2016. I mean, Trump is still leading the polls, and that's a dangerous prospect on its own, and, Hillary Clinton is on the other side. And we're going to talk a little bit about Hillary Clinton tonight as well, because she has done some horrible things. Some of her actions and some of her the things that she did at the State Department have kind of led to a horrible scenario going on in Libya. I do have some good news tonight, though. We are joined once again by Manny Aguilar. He's been out of the show for a while now due to, I don't know exactly. I don't know if he wants to explain what's going on. But what's up, Manny? Glad to have you back.
Hey, how you doing? Happy New Year to everybody. I'm feeling 90% okay now. And of course, I'll be out of activist work from, when the incident happened December 15 all the way to February 15. So I just got to slow down, take 2 months off on that, because doing my work and then doing activist work is just too much. I mean, they're just all over the place, and even my people told me today, they said, we've never met anybody that pushes the envelope like you do. You're so passionate about what you do and stuff like that, and I feel kind of, in a way, really, kind of like I'm not an activist that can just be a spectator, but unfortunately this is the way it's got to be and stuff like that. And so, how I'm just blessed that I'm here, that I've actually, nobody thought I was going to make it to Christmas, and I'm here. And so to me, the blessing is that, obviously the GOD has reasons to keep me around again, and stuff like that. And so I don't take anything for granted, and that's including my friends and stuff like that. So a big shout out to all you guys and stuff like that. And it's just kind of hard to almost in tears to know that the 2 last activist work that I was doing was actually down there in San Diego, and that almost became my last one, and it's kind of really sad and stuff like that. So, love to everybody that sent my love my way, okay?
So
awesome,
glad you're back,
man.
Manny.
Well, yeah, we're glad you're alive, dude. We were worried about you for a while, and you're our resident activist here on the Anti-Media Radio, so we're glad you're okay, and really glad to have you back tonight to help us comment on some of the stuff going on. Now, many people listening tonight probably saw our show promo meme, which is more or less hinting at the Obama's announcement, his executive actions on gun control. And, I mean, I didn't watch it myself, but apparently he was crying and stuff. I saw plenty of pictures, and he was up there crying while he announced it, which definitely it kind of pulls at the emotional heartstrings of people, and it really makes it seem like he's genuinely concerned about what's going on and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is that Obama is pretty much responsible for a lot of children dying around the world, and of course, he can't be solely held accountable for all these horrible things going on in the Middle East. And for instance, the perfect example is with the Syrian refugee crisis, and we all remember the photo of the kid that was dead on the beach, after he drowned because he was a refugee trying to escape from Turkey. So we can't lay the sole blame on that, for that whole scenario on Obama, but he's definitely played his part, and he helped finance the Syrian revolution, the Syrian civil war, and there's been plenty of leaked documents that show that the Obama administration, along with the CIA, helped create ISIS, either pretty much directly or indirectly. So it is pretty hypocritical for him to go up there and make this big stink about the kids that were killed at Sandy Hook and that kind of thing, when his same policies are kind of responsible for other horrendous things going on against children all around the world. But the executive action was announced yesterday, which we didn't have a show yesterday, and Claire actually covered all these new rules and stuff that the Obama administration has put into place in order to supposedly stem the violence created by guns. So I guess, Claire, I'd like to go over to you first to talk about this executive action on gun control and what they're trying to do with it. And, I've seen so many different people on the left that are my friends that are like, oh, well, it just doesn't go far enough. And people on the right saying that this is some kind of gun grab. And I've seen a bunch of disinformation out there saying they're going to start hunting down people with unregistered guns, which is purely fiction. So it's important to really keep our bearings about us. So, Claire, what can you tell us about what's really going on with this announcement by Obama?
Okay, well, first of all, it's like a series of executive orders. So there are a bunch of different actions that he completed. And the general gist is that they wanted to close the quote-unquote gun show loophole, so that no matter where a vendor is located physically, whether they do business over the internet or at a gun show or in a brick-and-mortar store, they will have to be licensed and background checks will have to be performed. Any violations of this would be like a 5-year sentence and or a fine of up to $250,000. So I guess they're trying to make this pretty serious. They also have hired a bunch of ATF agents and FBI agents, or they're planning on doing that, and they will be tracking purchases and looking for quote-unquote indicators for that people are dealing quote-unquote illegally in firearms, so that even if somebody purchases, say, 2 weapons online, they could possibly come under the radar and be searched and, scrutinized to see if they're actually dealing guns, like buying guns to deal them as a dealer. So, there are all these strictures in place now, and I guess it's pretty interesting considering how many times we've just let, weapons and tanks and all sorts of things overseas we just leave them there, and yet at home they're going to track things like handguns for, lawful owners, because the one thing that really hasn't been said much is that criminals, people who intend to use firearms in a legal way, are not going to go through legal means to get them. So putting these restrictions in place doesn't really make sense, and it's not going to be effective for what they claim to be doing with it. It's really, in my opinion, just another form of control and more laws that are completely unnecessary. I think there are other ways to do a lot of what he put in place, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like just adding to the bureaucratic process, the red tape involved in getting guns legally. But as you said, a lot of the criminals that are using guns aren't getting them legally anyway. Some of them are, some guns that are used for crimes and mass shootings and stuff are acquired legally, or are taken, like in the case of, I think in the Sandy Hook massacre, whatever you want to call it. I think the guns were bought legally by the kid's mom, and then the kid kind of stole them from his mom or whatever.
Yeah,
so
that's the thing. I mean, they're not going to. These laws aren't going to do anything more to really protect against the things that they claim to be protecting against. Like, I understand the idea of having background checks. I understand some of these things. I'm reluctant to understand them, but I understand them. They're talking about having stricter and more comprehensive mental health checks for people, and making sure all the information for background checks is consolidated, so there is accurate information. The idea is maybe in good faith, but the reality is this is not going to do anything that it claims to be doing.
Yeah, and we had a pretty good conversation on gun control a few weeks back when California announced its new rules on taking guns from people who are suspected of having mental issues and things like that. And I look at it from the prospect of anybody that's going to go out and kill someone, anyone that's a murderer, they obviously have mental issues, right? Nobody that's perfectly sane, unless it's an extreme circumstance, is going to just go murder somebody or kill someone, not out of self-defense. So I think that understanding mental health and all that is actually something really important if we actually want to start dealing with the issue of violence in general, whether we're talking about stabbings or shootings or any kind of ways that people kill people, blowing people up, things like that. Most of these crimes are committed by people that have some kind of mental illness or are in a state of temporary mental distress or whatever. And so, background checks and that kind of thing, I could definitely understand where they're coming from and why they want to do that kind of thing. But Manny made the point when we did have that conversation a few weeks ago about who gets to say who's mentally, capable and who's not, because that's a real big question here is, who gets to call the shots on who gets guns and who doesn't, and that's where we really get onto that slippery slope where it could easily the argument could be made to say, well, a certain race group can't have guns, or let's say a guy like Trump got elected and he said, well, Muslims can't have guns. And of course we got to think back to the days of the Black Panthers and when they occupied a government building in Sacramento back in the 60s, and the argument was made that, well, black people shouldn't be armed and stuff like that. And so this is the real slippery slope that we can get on when we start identifying groups and saying, okay, well, these groups of people can't have guns. And that's where you start, having this problem with the whole mental health designation and that kind of thing. And go ahead.
Sorry. On the mental health note, though, even inside the community of people who might be dealing with mental health issues, if somebody is receiving Social Security disability for a mental health issue, it seems from these orders that might have a severely negative effect on somebody's ability to buy a weapon. And that designation alone, I mean, there are so many different mental health issues that somebody could be on disability for that would exclude a whole, swath of the population. And although there is supposedly some sort of recourse in exceptions that can be made, I doubt that's going to be a very easy process for people who would otherwise be law-abiding and, should be able to have weapons. So I don't know. This is pretty frightening, in my opinion, in terms of kind of clamping down on rights.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind is that people with mental health issues, some of them are some of the most vulnerable people as well, and so some of them would be the ones that most need firearms to defend themselves.
Not to mention that the primary uprising that would take place would be veterans, and I don't know. I mean, I'm sure tons of veterans have mental health problems, and they're not going to be able to be armed, and it goes into that too, man. They're getting rid of dissent one layer at a time.
Yeah, that's
but one of the things about, we talk about mental people and stuff like that, but it still comes back down to who makes the choice. Like, for instance, you got all these people that are not mentally ill, but they're radicals out there. They're just, like, for instance, right now, one of the stories, the FBI had already visited Nick Barnabe or Manny Aguilar. If I would have made the comment that Ted Nugent made against the president just because he sits on the board of the NRA,
Yeah.
Yeah, man, definitely. I mean, it really comes down to who gets to call the shots here, and do we want to leave that choice up to the federal government? Probably not. That sounds kind of like a bad idea. And so, it's important to see what's actually going on, because there is a bunch of misinformation about the guns. They're not taking everybody's gun away and stuff like that yet, but that's definitely. All this propaganda that recently against guns, I wouldn't doubt that they would want to eventually put some kind of major restriction or, rolling back of gun rights. Many of England's former colonies and England itself have already done so, including Australia. They have seen a reduction in gun violence, but at the same time, there's a exponential increase in alternate forms of violence too. So, the thing is that you can't just do away with violence, especially in a violent society like the United States, by just banning, these objects. You can't just ban guns and say, okay, well, there's not going to be any more violence. That'd be like saying, well, murder, we got to make murder illegal, and I'd be in favor of that. But shit, they made murder's been illegal since forever, and it still happens, and so people will find a way, whether it's through finding illegal guns or whether it's using other objects, knives or hammers or bats or whatever. People that are sick in the head or people that are under severe circumstance are still going to find a way to kill people when they want to, and so I think that we need to look a little deeper here when we talk about gun violence and start figuring out why it's happening.
And Nick, also, when you make rules, it's got to be across the board. Because, like, for instance, you were banned from Facebook for 30 days. Well, I don't see Ted Nugent being banned from what he said about assassination of the president. I didn't see him banned for 30 days from Facebook, and I sure haven't heard anything about no Secret Service visiting him. You know what I mean? So, the rules have to be across the board,
Yeah, man, great point. If we're going to talk about gun control, how about we start disarming the cops first? You know what I mean? And that is one thing in England. Most of the regular cops, like the regular street cops in England, don't have guns. They still do kill people. Some of the cops have guns. Certain especially like assigned cops do have guns. But the regular street cops are armed with like tasers and batons, and because of that, the cops aren't killing a bunch of people over there too, So if we're going to talk about gun control, I think we should you know, as you said, across the board, man. If we're going to do away with guns, well, you can't. You got to do it with all of them, you know. And so the government have to lay down their guns as well. And it kind of scales up to this whole argument about nuclear non-proliferation. And of course, North Korea was in the news earlier today because they supposedly tested a H-bomb, a hydrogen bomb. Those not familiar with that, compared to like a regular nuclear weapon, their H-bomb is much more powerful, and it's a little bit harder to build. I mean, the stuff that we dropped in Japan and Hiroshima, those are tiny compared to what H-bombs can do.
Plus, they can be miniaturized, so you can put them in a suitcase.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, the United States, of course, was quick to condemn North Korea for testing this nuclear device. And there was an earthquake over there in the same region where they claim to have been testing this thing. So it is pretty likely that they tested at least some kind of nuclear device. There's been plenty of people saying, okay, well, we don't think it was an H-bomb, you know, but it was something. Either way, you know, the thing is that the U.S. is over here standing on this, you know, pedestal saying, hey, North Korea, you can't have nuclear weapons, or Iran, you can't have nuclear weapons. Well, you know, we happen to be the only country on earth that's actually used them against people and killed a bunch of people using them. So it's kind of hard to give us the moral high ground there, and for us to be able to say, okay, well, all you countries can't have nuclear weapons, only the ones that we choose can have them, and it's okay for them to have them. That's it. I think if we're going to talk about nuclear non-proliferation, I mean, we got to talk about just getting rid of those weapons altogether. You know, we can't say, okay, Iran, North Korea, you can't have them, but you know, the United States and China, you know, you guys can, because then that gives that just provides a place for people to be bullied, right? And that's the same exact thing. It's like if you disarm certain groups of the population, well, then they're easy targets, and it's the same exact thing. This is why Iran has been pursuing the nuclear weapon, and as DB has made the argument that they already have one, which is exactly why we haven't already overthrown their government. You know what I mean? Which makes a lot of sense. It is a great deterrent, and same as a firearm, it's a great deterrent. If you know someone's got a gun in their house, you know, you're less likely to go rob them.
Yeah, and just a quick note on nuclear non-proliferation. You know, Gaddafi probably wished he hadn't signed that deal he did, because, you know, he didn't have any defense at all, even against an internal coup.
Yeah, we're going to get into Gaddafi right now because, you know, this thing with Libya is really sad. Those that aren't familiar, back in 2011, we helped overthrow the government of Libya because they cracked down on some of the Arab Spring protests. At least that's what the reports were saying at the time. You know, meanwhile, we allowed plenty of our allies to crack down on these same exact protests, including Qatar and Saudi Arabia. In fact, they used our weapons to crack down on their protesters. And, you know, Saudi Arabia is still in the process of beheading a lot of their Arab Spring protesters. In fact, there's a guy right now, a young guy, that's literally waiting to just have his head chopped off in Saudi Arabia for protesting in the Arab Spring. But anyway, apparently it's okay when our allies crack down on protests, and you know, obviously it's okay when our own government cracks down on protests, because we're over here using tear gas on our protesters and stuff like that. Apparently, you know, that's perfectly fine. But you know, that's what Gaddafi did over in Libya, according to reports, and that was basically a death sentence for him, because as soon as he started cracking down on protests, the propaganda machine kicked into high gear, and within, you know, a couple months, we were over there establishing a no-fly zone, which basically means destroying their entire air force. And then we overthrew we killed Gaddafi. We helped kill Gaddafi. We helped capture him, and they killed him publicly, and they displayed his body publicly, and it was a really horrible execution. But you know, that's kind of history now at this point. Nothing we can do to bring him back. But the real story here is now the aftermath of what's going on in Libya, because now the country is really in a really bad scenario, man. The caller from 347, make sure you mute your radio, because we could hear ourselves in the background. There you go. So, you know, now the scenario in Libya has turned much to the worse. First of all, after Gaddafi fell, he had a bunch of these tribal factions kind of placated over there, and they were kind of at peace, and they were enjoying a relative era of prosperity under the rule of Gaddafi, even though, yeah, he was a dictator. He wasn't the greatest guy, but he was kind of in a similar vein to Saddam Hussein, maybe a little bit less brutal than Saddam. But he had his country stabilized, and he had them pretty prosperous. I mean, Libya had the highest standard of living in the whole continent of Africa under his rule, and that none of that really mattered, apparently, according to the West, because we went over through the government. So now you got all these tribal factions vying for power over there. There's two established governments, one in Tripoli, the other in Benghazi, and we all know the Benghazi fiasco. I guess we may touch on that a little bit here. I don't want to go too far into that because that's a whole rabbit hole of its own. But so you got two separate governments in Libya waging a civil war against each other. And then you have dozens of tribal factions that have various allegiances that have allied with the different governments or allying with each other. And now you've got ISIS establishing a major stronghold over there in Libya. And now ISIS is making a move on Libya's oil. And so ISIS is over there taking over oil fields, taking over oil infrastructure, shipping routes, and port cities, and things like that. And this is all a product of kind of U.S. foreign policy, man. We went over through that government and didn't really care about the aftermath, or maybe that was part of the plan to have that country fall into chaos like that. It looks like sooner or later they may try to make the case for a direct foreign invasion of Libya to straighten it out, quote unquote straighten it out. But we saw how that worked out in Iraq. But the moral of this story is that once again, after we go topple some government in the Middle East, you got more or less extremists going in and filling that power vacuum. And it's not just ISIS. I mean, a lot of the other so-called rebels or the rebel groups that we were supporting at the time in Libya were openly affiliated with Al-Qaeda. I mean, shit, it's like, when are we going to actually stick to our word here and say, look, Al-Qaeda is our enemy? Because that's what George Bush was telling us that whole time. It's like, Al-Qaeda is the enemy. And then Obama took over at the helm, and it's like, yes, Al-Qaeda is the enemy. We got to keep looking for Bin Laden and all that stuff. But then when it came to Libya, it's like, we're going to openly ally ourselves with groups that have already shown allegiance to Al-Qaeda. It's like, dude, where is the consistency here? It's like, what the hell are we doing? Got a great article up from Zero Hedge over on the Anti-Media called "The U.S. Helped Overthrow Libya in 2011." Here's what's happening there now, because, man, it is really a living hell. And what many people don't know about the refugee crisis, too, is that a lot of these refugees are coming from Libya. They're not all coming from Syria. In fact, there's nearly as many people trying to get out of Libya as there are out of Syria. And again, it's U.S. foreign policy that helps start these crises, and then it's us that have to deal with it later on, whether it's the taxpayer dealing with the refugees or our allies in Europe. I mean, there's a bunch of these guys from Libya flooding into France and England. And of course, a lot of people there don't want the refugees to be there, and it's hard for me to make the case to be against refugees when it's our own governments creating these refugee crises to begin with, and so it's on us really to stop this hawkish foreign policy that's going on in the Middle East. If we really do want to stem the refugee crisis, we can't just let the government go topple foreign countries and then complain about the refugees. It's like, dude, let's have a little consistency here. What do you guys think?
Hell yeah.
Well, there you go. There's a good answer. We got a few callers on the line, so let's make some rounds here with the callers. We haven't taken callers in a few weeks, so the person from 765 who just said hell yeah, how's it going? What do you want to talk about tonight?
Oh, it's going pretty good, man. I was actually born in Lebanon, the country, and I moved to Indiana, the United States, when I was 4 years old. I've been out here, it took me maybe 5 years ago to finally be awakened to what's really going on in the USA. Everything I believed about money and all this crap is just, it's all nonsense, and I'm tired of it. And just now, my parents kind of aren't that educated, like as far as like English and stuff like that goes. But I don't know if you've ever heard of the Thrive movement, and I'm finally just getting my dad to awaken to all this, and his mind is just blown.
Yeah, I've heard of Thrive. They've got some pretty interesting ideas, like about resource-based economy and stuff like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, man. And it's just, there's little groups that it's actually called the Thrive movement. There's little groups that we actually meet up and like talk about ways how we can stop this like once and for all, because honestly, it makes me want to cry just seeing like what's going on. Honestly, how the government, but for example, the post you guys had, how they pretend to cry for United States children while they're bombing the shit out of other countries and stuff. It's ridiculous. It's all about money to them. And when is it ever going to end, man? Like, I can't wait till the day that all humans are just living in sync with each other, and everybody is just doing every action they take is for the better of humankind, for us to evolve and finally become what we ultimately can become.
Yeah, exactly. Great point, man. That's what we have to do. It's it's not going to be some politician that's going to come to power and say, you know what, it's time to just fix this shit. We got to stop the empire. We're going to have to do this, do that. It's like, first of all, if someone like that ever did get elected, they're going to be relatively powerless in the face of this huge government that is pretty much hell-bent on empire.
They'll get shot in the head, too.
Yeah. Second of all, it's going to be almost impossible
Somebody
for
said they get shot in the head.
Elected. It's going to be really hard for someone like that to get elected in the first place. And third of all, as DB was saying, man, if someone like that actually did get into power and started actually taking these actions, well, then the military-industrial complex isn't going to take very kindly to that kind of politician or figure, and they're going to have their way with them in the same way that other political figures in the past have had run-ins with bullets, or have suffered the greatest consequence in the form of JFK and things like that. I don't want to get into the conspiracy theory on that either, but
excuse me, brother. Excuse me, but can I just take a moment to recognize what you are actually doing right now? If more people were to get together and do this kind of stuff, man, I think we would just grow exponentially. So I just want to take a minute to recognize and acknowledge and thank you for the fact of getting something like this together, brother. Like, thank you so much, man. Honestly, this is great.
Hey, man, thank you for listening, and it's much appreciated. I guess sometimes we feel a little bit underappreciated here at the Anti-Media, but we're definitely working to, expand the radio show and the website and all this information, the memes, everything, all the time, and we just crossed 1 million followers on Facebook not too long ago, and it was a big celebration for us. I remember first starting this thing off and hitting the first 1,000 fans, and it was like a huge thing, and then 10,000, and then 100,000, and now we're at 1.4 million, and maybe we'll probably get to over 2 million this year, hopefully at some point, but yeah, it's just good to see and hear that people out there still searching for this information and trying to change things that are going on, because that's the only way to do it. Like I was saying, these politicians, as unlikely as it is, they're not really going to fix this problem that we're having. It's up to us. And I don't think it's up to these massive groups of people either. I think it is more like individuals changing their ways and influencing the people around them and things like that is what's going to have a greater impact on the world around us. And great point. We're going to get a little bit into something a little closer to Lebanon. We're going to be talking about Yemen in a few minutes, but first I want to take the rest of the callers that we have on the line before we move on here. We have someone from 760, which is a local San Diego individual. How's it going? You're on the Anti-Media Radio. You want to talk about anything in particular, or do you want to just join this conversation?
Yeah, I want to join it. I wanted to go back where you were talking about the Libya thing. So they were a stable country, and
Oh yeah, sure. What do you want to
like,
talk about with Libya?
yeah, it seems like the United States just, well, in my point of view, it sounded like the United States just seemed like they were doing really good. They were being stable, so they just wanted to jump in and just take over it, make them like crumble up and just, you know.
Yeah,
I don't
Yeah,
know.
there's. Go ahead.
it's
Didi.
like what else do you do when you're the lone superpower in the world? You just
Yeah, when someone's
you let your
trying
crazy
to come
out.
up and like when someone's trying to come up and the United States just sees that, they just want to make them, you know, they just want to break that down.
Yeah, and there's definitely some underlying geopolitical reasons for what went on in Libya because I remember there was this great video and I included it in some of the past stuff I did on Libya. It's not in the most recent article, but retired General Wesley Clark, which is he's pretty controversial. I mean, he on one hand he's given away a bunch of this geopolitical insights talking about how the neocons had plans to topple 7 countries in 7 years, which included Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Libya and Somalia and other countries. They obviously weren't successful with their push for Iran for multiple reasons, as we discussed earlier, that they may already have the nuclear bomb, and so that's a deterrent that they had to respect. But the thing about Gaddafi was that he was rallying the African continent as a whole to create I don't want to call it like a European Union, but it was something similar, like a economic bloc for Africa. And he was a very strong nationalist for Africa. And, Africa is very, very, very rich in resources. Libya in particular has a lot of oil. So a lot of oil in Libya. They got a lot of gold. The thing also about Gaddafi was that he was also advocating for a gold currency called the dinar, which is more or less kind of a currency based on Islamic values. We all know that alternative currencies aren't looked upon very kindly by the U.S. petrodollar system, and so that's another aspect of why Gaddafi was a major target during the Arab Spring, because there, like we mentioned earlier, there was plenty of countries that cracked down on these Arab Spring protests. Every country did. Yeah. Every country did, and only some of them caught the wrath of the United States. One of them is Syria, which is still unfolding now because Russia backs the Syrian government, so it wasn't so easy to just go topple that government. Libya, Gaddafi didn't really have a big ally like Russia. They didn't have anyone like that. They had economic partners in Africa. They had economic partners throughout the Middle East, but they didn't have a superpower backing them up like Syria does. So Syria is a whole different scenario. But it was so easy for us to just stir up some propaganda and say, okay, we're just going to go topple the Libyan government. But it was only several months before that when Gaddafi announced that he was going to start trading his oil for gold only. And so that threatened the petrodollar system. They didn't want that to catch on, and so they used this protest, the cracking down of the protests, as an excuse to topple the government. Even though the truth of the matter is that they were trying to protect geopolitical interests, the petrodollar, and things like that. We weren't just toppling. We don't just topple governments for the hell of it. They do it with a very real intention, and as horrible as those intentions are, it's good that we're able to see through them and realize that we weren't bringing peace and freedom to Libya because, if you look at it now, obviously that wasn't the intention. We didn't bring them democracy. We brought them a civil war that's going on between a bunch of Islamo-fascists now that are trying to establish their own version of fascism in that country, and we're going to back whichever faction promises to sell us the oil and promises to work under the petrodollar system. And it doesn't matter how democratic they are or not. If you look at our allies in Saudi Arabia, I mean, it's a theocracy. It's a dictatorship based on religion. We don't care about democracy. We care about oil and money and geopolitics. They do our dirty work in the Middle East. They're doing our dirty work for us in Syria by supplying ISIS and funding ISIS so that we don't have to take the blame for that stuff. Even though, the CIA has done plenty of things over there that are very questionable. But, we stay allied with places like Saudi Arabia because they do our dirty work. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next, because Claire Bernish has a great article on the Anti-Media today about what's going on in Yemen at the hands of Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabian-led alliance that's bombing the shit out of Yemen right now. And it just came out, we just found out today that they bombed a center for the blind in Yemen. And this just adds on to the list of horrible things that they've been doing over there. I mean, this isn't the first thing. They bombed out, I think, what was it, over 100 healthcare facilities already the Saudis have. And now keep in mind, like throughout this whole thing, it's not just the Saudis. The U.S. has already announced that they're providing logistical support for this operation in Yemen. And keep in mind, this is just us choosing sides in a civil war. And Claire wrote a great article about this earlier today. Claire, what can you tell us about this?
Well, it seems, I'm beginning to wonder, honestly, if the coalition isn't just bombing civilians on purpose. Like, if we're just bombing infrastructure, like hospitals and the Center for the Blind. I mean, they also hit a wedding hall in the city's Chamber of Commerce. They hit residences. There were no reports of any casualties in this particular set of bombings, but this isn't the first time they've done this kind of thing. And, what possible justification can they have for bombing a Center for the Blind or the Chamber of Commerce? The country's already in tatters. They're having they're in a serious food emergency, and at least half the country is like one step away from being in famine situation. So, I mean, everything is in tatters, and then we're still going to bomb the civilians. And I'm trying to figure out what the justification can possibly be for continuing to support Saudi Arabia in this campaign.
Yeah, it's horrible, and the Saudis are just probably one of the worst allies we have. I mean, they celebrated New Year's by beheading like 50 people.
I think it's inexcusable that we continue any sort of alliance, let alone association, with the Saudis. It doesn't make. There can be no justification for excusing the humanitarian abuses and atrocities that they commit, and then turning around and like saying, "Oh, I'm sorry about the children that were killed in this country." I mean, it's so ridiculous. It is just theater, and it's absurd.
Yeah, it really is. And the U.S. inked, I think, over $10 billion in arms deals with Saudi Arabia last year alone. Canada has been selling them massive amounts of arms. In fact, there was a great story out from commondreams.org a couple days ago about how the Canadian government condemned the Saudi beheadings, but then they went and followed through on one of their arms deals with them, and so I guess basically what we're seeing right now is the U.S., the West, they're trading arms for oil with Saudi Arabia. We supply them with all their weapons so that they can do their dirty work over there. And most of it, let's face it, most of what Saudi Arabia is doing is securing oil under the disguise of fighting a religious war between Sunni and Shia. What the Saudis are actually doing is fighting for oil, geographical oil regions, and that's more or less the motivation behind what they're doing in Yemen and what they're doing in Syria and Iraq. And all those places that they're operating. And we're basically just trading them arms for oil, and it's really sad.
I think one of the worst things that we've traded them is, there is an international ban on cluster munitions, which are just insidiously horrible. They fall, and the unexploded subordinances often are, children play with them because they think they're toys, and they get maimed or killed. And so, 117 countries in the world banned these for weapons of war, and yet the Saudis and the U.S. did not sign this agreement. So we manufacture these cluster munitions and then sell them to the Saudis, who then use them on the Syrian Syria, but also the Yemeni civilians. And I'm still trying to figure out what the justification for this is.
Yeah, I mean,
could I just cut in and so. The facts are there, and I would just like to say I've been trying to brainstorm on some ideas on what we could do to stop this. I've heard about a gold-backed currency that's just put into circulation lately, but what if we just organized a large movement of where just everybody got together and just refused to budge until somebody, until somebody gave up. Like, how are we going to ever beat this is what my biggest concern is. Like, what are we going to do?
Yeah, that's a huge question, man. And what we're dealing with now is an empire, and I guess the best way to see how empires are normally brought down are, looking at the past. And I think we're witnessing already the downfall of the American empire, because they're normally brought down under their own, by their own demise. And one of the things, especially with the Romans, what they did is they overextended themselves. And that's something that the U.S. is doing currently with this ballooning defense spending and this massive debt and deficit that we're dealing with right now, and trying to justify that. Most of the money, I mean, back in the day, a lot of these empires would go out and they'd pillage other countries, and then the citizens would more or less benefit from the treasures and stuff that was raided from these countries. But now we're dealing with a scenario where the taxpayer finances this military adventurism, like in Libya and in Syria and Iraq and things like that. And then the corporations kind of come in and they reap the rewards. The Halliburton goes in and gets the contracts, or Exxon gets the oil field, and things like that. And that's kind of what we're dealing with now. And so that itself is putting strain on the American empire. And I think what we need to kind of concern ourselves with is how to accelerate this kind of,
absolutely,
and getting people to know and see what's going on here with what's going on. I think plenty of people are already kind of fed up with the empire, and they're fed up with these. Halliburton is almost like a bad word at this point. So a lot of people are already aware of it. The sad thing, the worst part of it all, is that a bunch of people are going to continue dying, and this foreign policy stuff is going to continue until something major happens with the empire. Because if you look at the popular media and you look at the presidential debates, I mean, shit. How many times did they mention terrorism and ISIS in the last Republican presidential debate? Like over 100 times, I think it was.
Yeah.
And so
first it was Al Qaeda, now it's ISIS. Like, what's it going to be next? I think maybe what you're trying to the best thing we can do now is maybe just keep spreading awareness. I was thinking maybe spreading the most awareness to the people who they've given a monopoly to on power and force, like the police, the army, and stuff like that. I think is the kinds of people we need to be focusing on spreading that awareness to.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. I think you're right. There are a lot of people in positions of power that have a open mind.
So we need someone to hack Stars and Stripes.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That and then also, I think by drying up some of the tax base that supplies, funds these wars and stuff. Because as I said, it's kind of like, the foreign policy. It's kind of like socialism for these corporations and for these private contractors, and it's kind of like capitalism for us. So these guys, someone else pays for all the war adventurism for them to go get these oil fields, and then they get to privatize the earnings and all the money from it, and they get to keep that. And it doesn't.
I had a thought. Okay, BDS works, boycott, divest, and sanction, works with people who are boycotting and dealing with their problem with Israel, right? So what if we just practiced BDS on the corporations and the sources of the war machine, and just turn it around?
Exactly, and that's exactly what I was actually thinking about right now too.
But it's tough because you can't boycott some of these companies because all they do is government contracts.
Yeah, so
but the ones you can.
So one of the things besides just a boycott, is something that I think would be extremely effective, would be a general tax strike, where we say, look, we're not going to pay the taxes as long as you guys are going to continue doing these things. Or we could identify the taxes that we're paying that go into these things and say, look, we're not paying those taxes. You know what I'm saying? And I've always been an advocate of saying, like, look, if taxation is going to be involuntary, well, then we should at least be able to choose where it gets to go. Because I know for me, if I was paying tax and I got to choose where it's going, it's not going to be to bomb kids in Yemen. It's going to go pay for kids in my community to get welfare, get school lunches and shit like that. You know what I mean? So, you know, I think that one thing that we can do that would be highly effective would be a tax strike. And even if we just had a couple million people sign up for it, and start doing that, it would.
Dude, that is a fucking amazing idea, man. That is an amazing idea. Like, I'm dead serious. Like, you need to, are you the person who manages the anti-media website and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Man, you need to. We need to you need to post something like that, and I will share it with all my. I know I have 1,000 friends, and if I can get 1,000 of my friends to look into this, and then they get 1,000 of theirs, and so on and so forth, I think we can make a really big, you know, dent into their whatever the fuck this bullshit is all about. Like, what is their agenda? Why are they doing this?
Yeah, man, exactly, and that's what it's for, is for the money, you know, and the thing with the military-industrial complex is that it needs war to exist. And one of the stories we covered on the anti-media, I think it may have been you, Claire, was that when the Paris terror attack happened, the stock prices for a lot of these contractors jumped. I mean, Zenith and Raytheon, I mean, their stock prices bumped up a lot because people understood, the investors understood that, oh, well, more terrorist attack, that means more bombs are going to drop. That means more money in our pockets. You know what I mean? And so money is the driving factor, I think, for most of these wars and most of these incursions. I mean, there's been...
So money is... Who is the person who quoted money is the root of all evil?
I'm not sure, man. I think that was... I'm not sure, but it's pretty...
Regardless, it was spot on, was
it's
it
a pretty
not?
universal quote at this point. But definitely, I mean, it rings true now, just as it always has. These wars are being fought for money, and... so many people have to die for it. In fact, the whole thing in Syria, and you know, this goes back into the whole geopolitics of what's going on there. And as we mentioned before, it's very much Saudi Arabia and their allies, including the United States, directly or indirectly financing the Syrian opposition, the rebels, and that includes up to and including ISIS. But the whole reason behind that war is because Assad is refusing to allow a pipeline to go from the Sunni oil states to go up through Turkey to feed Europe gas, because that would end up cutting Russia out of the European fossil fuel game. And so since Russia is a major ally of Syria, the Syrians aren't letting the pipeline be built. And so that's what sparked this whole civil war, and the whole reason why the U.S. is backing these other rebels is because of, you know, oil and money. And then you got Iran on the other side of the equation, which is also allied with Russia. They're the ones that are mostly backing and providing manpower to the Syrian government to maintain their grip of control over Syria. And they're being, you know, equipped with Russian-made weapons and equipment and stuff like that. And so you got a textbook proxy war being played out over in Syria between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which are the two major oil powers in the Middle East. And on one side you got the people being equipped by Russia. On the other side you got the people being equipped by the United States. But in the end, it's all about this money, you know, and the oil companies that are going to make mad profits from cutting Russia out of Europe. And someone's got to provide that oil for Europe. Europe's the second largest consumer of fossil fuels in the entire world outside of the United States. And of course, you know, Asia is right behind it, and Asia is quickly becoming the new theater for these proxy wars. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. But yeah, this stuff is all about money. So if we could find the sources that they're using to finance this stuff. All the foreign policy is being conducted by state apparatuses. Therefore, you know, it's mostly being funded by taxes. And then you got, you know, of course, the Federal Reserve in the United States, which is enabling a lot of this foreign policy.
And it's privately owned. Brother, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to cut you off. I don't want to be that guy. I honestly okay, so my dad you have to remember, my dad he's Lebanese. He just came up to me and told me he wants me to come play this video that I had paused, this Thrive movement. I highly recommend it to everybody. Man, I hate to be just cutting out on you guys, but honestly, man, you should make that thing about the tax stripe where we just refuse to do that anymore. But thank you so much, man. And like, honestly, what you're doing, like, finally people are waking up, man. And that's awesome, man. Like, honestly, thank you guys so much.
For sure, man.
Hashtag refuse to file.
There you go. Yeah,
Right.
the tax strike is something that we've been talking about. The guys from the Common Ground movement have been pushing this idea forward. We're going to be in the development stages of it pretty soon here. Let's keep going here. We got a few other topics to go over. We got a couple other callers on the line, though. First, I'm going to go to area code 347. Thank you for waiting. You're on the Anti-Media Radio. What do you want to talk about?
Hi. Listening to the conversation so far, there's a lot of good knowledge about what's going on in the world that not a lot of people know about right now, because mass media would cover the truth up with something that's very sugar-coated for people not to panic or try to go against the American government. Like, for example, if you look at different Time magazines, the cover for ours are solely about things that happen in America, and others outside of the world are focusing on world issues. Therefore, a lot of Americans are blinded by the severity of what's going on in the world right now. So it's like they would worry about the issues for probably, let's say, a week or so. And then they'll move on to something that's like the latest trend or whatever. So they have no idea that whatever is going on outside of our borders is going to affect us greatly in the future. And people just don't want to believe that, because if nothing's happening to them now and the government's saying everything's okay, they got it, they're handling it, it's like, no, they're not going to take a second look at it, and they're not going to be exposed to it. And
yeah, that's our
job as it's our job as the people of this government, of this country, that we should do something if we believe something is wrong. And if a lot of people were exposed to what's going on in the world and that America is messed up in a way, then, you know, things would be different, and maybe the government would be different. So it's like, for example, the new presidential elections that are coming up with Donald Trump in it, it's like a lot of people surprisingly support what he believes in. Like when the recent thing that he said about not allowing Muslims into the country, that, you know, they have to say that they are Muslim to be allowed in the country, and he wants to make sure none of them come into the country because of the recent terror attacks in Paris or the recent issue with ISIS. It's pretty sad that a lot of people agree with him, and then they don't see that this happened in history before. This is just history repeating itself, and we're allowing it, and we're not doing anything about it.
Exactly.
So
we're buying right into the fear mongering, you know. And I hate to cut you off here, but we're coming up on the end of the show. This is why we need 2 hours. We're gonna have it pretty soon here. We have one caller we couldn't get to from 312. Sorry we didn't get to you, but make sure you call back in on Monday. We're gonna be back here live, same place, same time. Anti-Media Radio goes 5 days a week here on UCY.tv, 8 o'clock Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. Peace out.
Yo, here we go through the stereo.